The passage tonight is 2 Timothy chapter 4, reading from verse 9. It says, this is Paul speaking to Timothy, do your best to come to me soon. For Demas, in love with this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Luke is alone with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me for the ministry. Tychicus I have sent to Ephesus. When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas. Also the books, above all the parchments. Alexander the coppersmith did me great harm, and the Lord will repay him according to his deeds. Beware of him yourself, for he strongly opposed our message. At my first defense, no one came to stand by me. All deserted me. May it not be charged against them. But the Lord stood by me and strengthened me, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. So I was rescued from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen. Greet Prisca and Aquila in the house of Onesiphorus. Erastus remained at Corinth, and I left Trophimus, who was ill, at Miletus. Do your best to come to me before winter. Eubulus sends greetings to you, as well do Pudens and Linus and Claudia and all the brothers. The Lord be with your spirit. Grace be with you.
And first things first, well done, Micah, getting through that passage. It was well done. Yeah, so I'm involved in Langham preaching. The work is an amazing work. I feel very privileged to be a part of it. Essentially, what we try to do is nurture movements of biblical preaching, indigenous grassroots movements in mother tongues in the countries of the majority world, so Africa, Latin America, Asia primarily. Studies show that 80% of people who are preaching in those areas of the world, 80% of the regular preachers will have no opportunity to go to a Bible college or a seminary. And so they are the preachers that we have a heart for. If you're interested, I got just a few little booklets left that can explain the ministry a bit more to you if you'd like. I'm really grateful for some advice that was given to me many years ago. And that is that when you walk into a room like this one, or into an organization or ministry, that you assume that everyone is a leader. You don't walk in and think, I wonder who is and who isn't. Nah, everyone can be an influence for good and for God. Start there. In fact, everyone a follower of Jesus and a leader of others. That's where the focus needs to be. And this evening, I want to work with this passage. I hope that you've got your devices and Bibles with you, because it takes a bit to keep track of everyone. But Micah did very well. These are actually the Apostle Paul's last recorded words. This was it after this. And I think, as is the case with us and those we love, people's last recorded words can be quite important, can't they? Significant, things that are on their heart. And I think we find that here. Paul's in prison. The courtroom drama to determine his fate is going on. I think he probably senses that his ministry is over, that he may die where he sits. Winter is approaching. He's cold. He's alone. He's been saying weighty things, bold and clear and direct, fight the good fight, and finish the race and this kind of thing. And now it's as if Paul is scratching out the final pieces of his final letter. And I sort of imagine the prison door kind of scraping on the floor as it opens, and one of the local pastors comes in. He's a regular visitor. He's a trusted friend. He's one of those listener counselor types. He grabs a stool from the other side of the room, comes across near Paul. His face fills with empathy. His eyes glisten and moisten. And he leans forward a little bit, as does the counselor. And he asks, as does the counselor, "So, Paul, how do you really feel?" And we have these verses, these beautiful verses, where it's as if Paul just pulls open the curtains of his life right at the end and lets us in and sees how things really are in his life and his leadership. There's a couple of things I want to show you from this passage. One is that Paul carries lots of people in his heart. His heart is crowded with people. There are people everywhere in this passage. And let's just try to cluster them together just so that we see them more clearly. There are those whom he loves as his own children, like Timothy. In chapter 1, he refers to him as my dear son. And now in chapter 4, twice, in verse 9 and in verse 21, he says, "Do your best to come quickly. Come before winter." You sense the urgency, even the desperation. Paul is missing Timothy. He is like a son to him. We may gravitate today to words like mentoring or coaching, but actually with this love, there is something fundamentally parental at work. Leadership love is parental love at its best. It's the same kind of brand. And that's this first group, like Timothy. Then there are those who have deserted him that are on his mind, like Demas in verse 10. From earlier letters, we know that he was a faithful co-worker for Paul and with Paul, but not anymore. In that clash that is always with us between choosing the values of this world and choosing the values of the world to come, Demas had finally made up his mind. It's the world, and I'm off. Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me. And that loving of the world is interesting because it's exactly the same word, one verse up in verse 8 or two verses up. One moment, Paul is speaking of those whose longing, whose love is for Christ's appearing, longing for it, loving it. And then just a few words later, using the very same word very deliberately, it's all about Demas and his longing and love for this world. And don't miss the four there at the start of the comment about Demas. The longing for Timothy is caused in part by the desertion of Demas. So as you'd expect with final words, there are such deep feelings at play here. Let's move on. There are those with whom he shares responsibility, his co-workers, the team, the sharers of the call. Titus to Dalmatia, Crescens to Galatia, Tychicus to Ephesus, Erastus in Corinth, Priscilla. It just goes on and on and on. People whom Paul trusted and empowered and released into extending the gospel with him, but also beyond him. For those of us who have been around for a while, this sharing, this team building, this bringing on of the next generation, it's such a joy, isn't it? It's one of the great joys in leadership. John writes in one of his letters that there's no greater joy than seeing your children walking in the faith. Well, this joy might come in number 2, I think. Watching those children in the faith stretch and grow as they take on new responsibilities. Don't know if you follow the news very closely, but this week, a couple from the UK who had been held by the Taliban in Afghanistan, been released, and they just arrived home in the UK yesterday. Missionaries. Amazingly, the woman, Barbie, who's 76, it was her dad that saw something special in my dad. My dad was a missionary surgeon in his early mid-30s, and that same Barbie's father, in his 60s, saw something in my father, drew him into leadership, and the rest of my father's life was spent in leadership and mission, all because of that man, believing in him and mentoring him and walking with him. And yet it is a besetting sin across the cultures of the world, this inability to draw the next generation into leadership alongside. Leadership is seen as some kind of ladder, and you look down to the lower rungs. You just wait your turn. When what really needs to happen is for the ladder to be turned into a relay and the rung to be turned into a baton, and get them involved in the relay of leadership alongside. I have a leadership team for who I try to care. There's one woman in the team who was in the training in Indonesia about, 14, 15 years ago. A student, one of the seminaries, came along. And it's been one of the great joys of my life over these years to watch her grow. She's now the director of our work across all of Asia and the South Pacific. Step by step, she's become a sharer of the call, and I watch her in leadership, and I just learn so much from her. One of the real sadnesses I feel in my work is that I've been in the homes of every one of my team members more than once, and none of them have been in my home. Because I live in a place called New Zealand, at the edge of the world. But she, Dwi Maria, is coming here in December, and Barbie and I are so, so excited. Then, moving on, there are those with whom he has a restored relationship. Look at verse 11. You see Mark there? Mark got into trouble with Paul back in the first missionary journey. Some failure took place, some sort of relationship breakdown. We don't really know. But Paul lost confidence in Mark, and he didn't continue. He sort of dropped out of the team. But look at this, years later, it's a very, very powerful verse. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry. A restored relationship. The one who had failed had grown and become useful and become wanted again. I've just finished a book. I took this brick of a book around the world with me and read it. Oh, man. It's the story of a leader of the Coptic Orthodox Church in Egypt. Just in the 1960s, he was the leader, patriarch. And this is a church that was planted by Mark, this same Mark, the writer of the gospel in the first century. So the Coptic church goes all the way back to the first century and has had a continuous witness to Jesus all through. It's amazing. Amazing. And this was the approach of this patriarch, Kyrillos, in the 1960s when he was faced with conflict or with enemies or with betrayal. I'd walk away from those people. He walked towards them to try and restore the relationship. At one point, he was faced with a corrupt young priest, made a real mess of things. What does he do? The patriarch, the Pope, basically. He brings this young corrupt priest to live with him for 6 months. Takes an enormous amount of criticism. What are you doing? And then this is how the writer describes it. It was not the reputation of the priest that concerned him, but rather healing him. Kyrillos refused to turn a blind eye to the corruption, but neither was he willing to forsake the corrupt priest. It's too easy to discard the marks today. It's been a problem in my leadership over the years. Just give them the flick. No. We don't erase them. We don't cancel them and move on. Some of the sweetest relationships in leadership are restored relationships. Goodness me. If we don't have reconciliation, what actually do we have in the gospel? And then another group, there are those who oppose him. Look at Alexander in verse 14. Lots of speculation about, what happened, but we don't really know except two things. The opposing is personal. He did a great deal of harm to me. And the opposing undermines the gospel, strongly opposed to our message. Verse 14. The person is an enemy of Paul and of the gospel. He's a dangerous piece of work. Alexander is different than Mark. And Alexander is still at work, still a threat. Watch out, Timothy. And then there are those who are his friends. And this is where sweating over the names, Micah, is so important. Ordinary people that Paul is prepared to name. Those ordinary names are so important. They're ordinary people like you and me. And they get a mention. And they're part of the circle of friends that Paul has. There's Luke. Only Luke is with me in verse 11. And then all these people in Rome like Eubulus and Pudens and Linus and Claudia. And I love the inclusion of all at the end of verse 21. The named and the unnamed, the core and the peripheral, each and all important. So you see, Paul carries a lot of people in his heart. Depending on how you count them, there's 17 names there. I think it's a bit like a game of tennis. There are people with whom he plays doubles. There are people who once were doubles partners but have quit and gone to the dressing room. There are people he's coached and sent to play on other courts. There are people who weren't much good, but went away, practiced hard, and came back to play with him. There are people on the other side of the net trying to volley winners past him or smash him out of the match. And then there are those in the stands cheering him on. Most of us here are much younger than Paul, near the beginning of leadership than the end. And yet example of these people are there, aren't they? We're tasting them already, glimpsing them, loving them like they're our own children, feeling deserted by them. Awful feeling. Sharing responsibility with them, enduring their ongoing opposition. Just so grateful for their friendship, having a restored relationship with them. This is the stuff of leadership. This is the leadership life, and it starts early. You know what I find with all of that? I find with all of those 17 people in those different groups, it uses up a lot of emotion. It's exhausting. I had a few years as principal at Carey Baptist College, and managing this kind of emotion and this exhaustion was really hard for me. And the board executive was really kind and supportive. And one morning, in a little cafe out the back in Newmarket in Auckland, out the back of the Westfield Mall there, Martin drew a bathtub on a napkin. And he added a tap and a plug hole. And he said to me, Paul, for leadership to be sustainable, you got to get the flow right. It's no good having more going down the plug hole than is coming in through the tap. And while there are people everywhere in this passage, taken together, they can drain the bathtub. But there's more going on in this passage. There are other people in this passage. Well, there's one other person, to be exact, so often missed as a part of the tap. Yes, Paul carries lots of people in his heart. We've seen that. But also we need to see that Paul carries lots of the Lord in his heart as well. 3 times. Look at it. Verse 14, the Lord. Verse 17, the Lord. And verse 18, the Lord. Let's have a closer look. In verse 14, as Paul faces opposition, he knows that the Lord will repay. We're back with Alexander. The message says it a little bit harshly. God will give him what he's got coming. You see, God is kind of a great and final accountant. He will balance the books in his way and in his time. He most certainly will. In the early years of my time with Langham, I went to Cambodia a lot. And if you know your history, in the 1970s, Pol Pot's regime lasted about 5 years, during which time the entire country pretty much became a concentration camp. 30% of the country's population were killed, and 90% of the Christian believers. And some of them were in the group we were training. You could tell. It was all over their face. It's just really a traumatic thing to live through. And in our training, we always focus in the basic training on the single story of the Bible. It's just remarkable. Written over hundreds of years by dozens of authors, and yet it is a single story. You can demonstrate that it is one single story, even though all those authors and all those centuries. And so late afternoon, each day, we would just focus a little bit on each of the bits of the story and make our way through it. Very quiet, respectful people, often a little bit passive and very hard, I found, with a translator to really draw them in. But on the Thursday evening, when we reached the end of the story, the final judgment, the big repaying at the end, I'm at the back of the room to the side. I'm not doing the teaching. And I am just gobsmacked by what happens. These passive, quiet learners start cheering and clapping and almost stomping their feet. They just came alive. And I'm going, what on earth is going on here? I'll never forget it. You see, when people live under oppression, they talk, sometimes even sing, about their hope in the judgment of God. It helps them endure. The Psalms are full of it. And when people live in reasonable comfort, what becomes the judgment of God? Either they forget it, or they are scared by it, or they say things like, how could a loving God be like that? As if his justice is less important than his love. Paul is living in a different world. First up, God's judgment is real, whether it's very soon or very much later. There is a judgment, and it's a judgment where God is punishing the bad, but also vindicating the right. In fact, in this very passage, in verse 8, the judgment of God towards Paul is translated as rewarding. And in verse 14, the judgment of God towards Alexander is talked about as repaying, rewarding, and repaying, very different words, but the very same word when Paul used them, because this judgment has these two sides to it. God has got it covered either way. And this attitude helps fill the bathtub. Where else does the Lord appear? Well, verse 17. As Paul faces abandonment, he knows the Lord is by his side. People have abandoned him, deserted him. He feels alone, but he isn't alone. The Lord stood at my side and gave me strength. There Paul is, probably chained to a soldier standing beside him, the picture of being abandoned, and yet he has this conviction, this capacity to see past the soldier, as it were, to the Lord standing beside him as well and strengthening him. He could have said, God is helping me, but no, he uses this unforgettable image of the Lord standing beside him, a presence, a quiet, assuring presence, a companion. But more than just standing beside him and strengthening here as well, both standing and strengthening like a retaining wall for his muddy, slipping emotions. And do you know what's just so lovely about this verse? Is that the experts reckon that this reference to the Lord is a reference to Jesus himself. So just stand back a little bit and see what's going on here. As Paul approaches death, he finds Jesus being for him exactly what Jesus himself felt he didn't have as he approached his own death on the cross. A companion. My Lord, why have you abandoned me? And who better to have standing by Paul's side than one who himself felt abandoned on the cross. One who could really say to Paul, I know how you feel, and I'm here for you. Even though others disappoint us, even though God can appear absent, even though God can sound silent, Jesus is still standing there. The Jesus of the cross and the resurrection with the story and the power to make a difference. I get it. I do it. It's so easy to feel that because people have abandoned us, God has abandoned us. No. It may feel like he's absent. He may, like the sun, slip behind the clouds for a while, but the sun is still there behind the clouds. He is still there. And if you are walking in God's ways and you experience an abandonment or a betrayal by a colleague or a friend or a parent or an employer, the Lord is there. He is standing by your side to give you strength. Turn and face him. That attitude helps fill the bathtub as well. This is a a very precious, I bought it all the way from Auckland in my car, so I really did need to show it to you. This is a very precious picture for me. I have in my study one year when we were in Hong Kong. We had training people from, we call the BC, the big country. And one of them was an artist from Beijing. And there were I think about 35 people that time. And on the final day, he asked each person for a favorite verse. 35 people. And he stayed up all night doing this with every verse, writing it out and giving it us the next day. And now in my study, my choice of a verse, well, it's 2 Timothy 4:17a. The Lord stood at my side and gave me strength. Then a final mention of the Lord is in 17 and 18, where as Paul faces suffering, he knows the Lord will rescue him. He says, as it is, he says, I've been delivered from the lion's mouth before. God has done that for me in the past, and he'll do it for me again in the future. It might not be immediate. It might not even be imminent. It's more likely to be ultimate. But for Paul, that kind of rescue was enough. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. See, with people everywhere, it is this Lord, his Lord, the one who rescues, the one who stands by his side, the one who repays. This is what makes the difference for him. This attitude fills the bathtub. So much so that we read, even in that situation, he is still able to say, the Lord stood at my side, gave me, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. And then the end of the next verse, to him be glory forever and ever. The mission of God and the glory of God, even at that point of his life, is still what animates him as he comes to his last words and his last hours. I think this passage works a bit like a photo and a frame for us this evening, and that's what I want to commend to you. The photo itself is just loaded with people, just like all the people crowding and burdening your heart. The photo is full of emotion and memory and drama and joy and exhaustion, all so very human. And then there is the frame. The frame. And what does a frame do? It highlights certain colors and features. It enfolds the photo and completes it. And it sets the human drama and emotion within a divine perspective and assurance that the Lord is still there. So that when life gets tough in life and in leadership, we are persuaded as well that there's one who repays, who strengthens, and who rescues. So we can get up and engage again in the mission of God, for the glory of God, wherever it is that our feet take us. And then the final word, the Lord be with your spirit. Grace be with you, each one. Thank you, loving God, for your precious word. I thank you for this apostle, a bit maligned and misunderstood, but here he is, pulling back the curtains of his heart for us. and showing us real issues that we feel as well. Our hearts are burdened with people in similar ways. But like with the apostle, help us to remember that you are there in our hearts as well. Very real, able to be trusted in your goodness and in your sovereignty. May it be so. In Jesus' name and for his sake we pray. Amen.